Black night. Heavy clouds hanging over the sky, and silence stretched across the Crimean coast. But this silence was nothing more than the calm before the storm. Sevastopol, Russia's most important naval fortress, the pride of the Black Sea Fleet. For centuries, this harbor had stood as a symbol of Moscow's power. But in the nights of 2023 and 2024, Sevastopol was shaken in a way that made an empire tremble. Suddenly, flames lit up the horizon. Explosions ripped through the docks. Ukrainian missiles and sea drones stormed straight toward Russian warships. The very first strike tore the night apart. Sirens screamed through the city of Nemeni. Vostochная trevoga. Attention, air raid alert. But it was already too late. One after another, Russian ships were swallowed by fire. Dark smoke rose high into the sky. Submarines and dry docks were destroyed. And the pride of Russia, the Black Sea Fleet, was burning. At that moment, Crimea plunged into darkness. Power grids collapsed. Command centers shattered. And Russian officers ran in panic. And then came the unthinkable. Massive warships, frigates, and landing vessels began fleeing from Sevastopol. Engines roared across the black waters as the mighty fleet abandoned its own fortress. In the darkness, sailors whispered the question no one dared to ask aloud. Is the Black Sea still ours? Or is it all over? This was not just an attack, this was the death of Russia's naval dominance. Tonight we take you inside that night. Inside that harbor, where one of the greatest defeats in modern naval history was written, where a superpower was forced to run, and where Ukraine turned the Black Sea into Russia's nightmare. The waves of the Black Sea carried the echoes of explosions, like thunder rolling endlessly over the horizon. In Sevastopol, the once proud stronghold of the Russian fleet, chaos had replaced order. Flames leapt from the docks, casting a fiery glow over the night. Russian sailors scrambled, shouting orders that were drowned out by the roar of incoming missiles. For decades, Sevastopol had been considered impenetrable, its defenses unshakable. But tonight, its walls were crumbling. Ukrainian drones darted low across the surface of the water, silent shadows carrying death with them. Some slipped past Russian radar, weaving between the patrol boats. When the first naval drone slammed into the side of a massive landing ship, the blast ripped open the steel hull, and seawater rushed in. The vessel groaned like a wounded animal before tilting, smoke and fire consuming its decks. Russian sailors threw themselves into the black water, their cries lost in the chaos. The fleet's commanders, hidden deep in their command posts, could only watch the destruction unfold on flickering screens. Communications lines were jammed. Electricity cut out across wide swaths of the city. Generators failed. Sevastopol was plunged into choking darkness, illuminated only by burning warships and the lightning of explosions.
A veteran officer muttered under his breath, "This is impossible. Sevastopol cannot fall." But the reality before his eyes betrayed him. As news of the strike spread, fear seeped through every corridor of the naval base. Officers rushed to evacuate classified documents. Trucks sped out of storage facilities, headlights piercing the smoke. Families of sailors were herded into shelters, their faces pale with dread. For the sailors on the docks, there was no strategy left. Orders were confused, overlapping, contradictory. Some ships were told to stay. Others were ordered to flee. Engines coughed to life, the low rumble of diesel reverberating across the bay as Russian frigates began pulling away from the burning harbor. In the darkness, the sight was surreal. Dozens of warships, destroyers, corvettes, patrol vessels, inching out of the once proud naval fortress, retreating under cover of night. To the untrained eye, it looked like chaos. To history, it would be recorded as one of Russia's most humiliating retreats. Sailors whispered among themselves, "Where are we going? Novorossiysk, Rostov, we can't stay here. Ukraine owns the night now." Meanwhile, the sky itself was alive with war. Ukrainian long-range missiles streaked down, their fiery tails splitting the heavens. Russian air defenses fired back, filling the night with glowing trails of interceptors. The air thundered with detonations. Some missiles were destroyed mid-air, scattering fragments like falling stars. But others punched through, slamming into dry docks and fuel depots. One missile found its mark on the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet. The entire structure shuddered. Windows blew out in a shower of glass. Walls cracked. Inside, officers were thrown to the ground as flames erupted around them. Dozens never rose again. By dawn, satellite images would confirm the devastation. But in that moment, to those who survived, it felt as though the very heart of Russia's Black Sea power had been torn out. On the open water, fleeing ships struggled to maintain order. Crews worked frantically to keep engines running at maximum speed, knowing that sea drones might be chasing them. Every shadow on the waves looked like death. Every spark of light in the distance could be a missile. A young Russian sailor clutched the railing of his corvette, his knuckles white, whispering a prayer he had not spoken in years. Beside him, an older comrade stared silently into the horizon, his eyes reflecting both fear and shame. Behind them, Sevastopol burned. Columns of smoke twisted into the night sky, visible for miles. For generations, Russian sailors had been taught that Sevastopol was eternal, a jewel of the Black Sea, untouchable. Yet now it looked like a graveyard of steel and fire. Military analysts would later say this was more than just an attack, it was a strategic turning point. Sevastopol had been the crown jewel of Russian naval power, a port that projected strength deep into the Mediterranean, a base that anchored Moscow's dominance in the south. But Ukraine had rewritten the rules of warfare. With precision missiles, with silent naval drones, with Western intelligence guiding their strikes, they had forced Russia to abandon its most sacred fortress. The ships that fled that night were not repositioning. They were retreating. They sailed east, toward Novorossiysk, a safer port within Russia's own borders. But safety came at a cost. Novorossiysk was far from the action, too distant to exert control over the Black Sea. In abandoning Sevastopol, Russia was abandoning its dream of total dominance. Yet beyond the grand strategies, it was the human cost that etched itself into memory. The terrified families, hiding underground as their city shook. The sailors, soaked in oil and seawater, dragging themselves onto the shore after their ship sank. The commanders, staring blankly at broken screens, realizing they had lost control. For them, it was not about geopolitics. It was about survival, about the shame of running from a place they once swore to defend. About watching comrades burn in the wreckage of what had been their pride. And so, the world woke the next morning to a new reality. Satellite images showed smoldering ruins in Sevastopol. Videos spread of massive plumes of smoke rising from the harbor. Reports confirmed that Russia had quietly relocated much of its fleet to Novorossiysk. What the world saw was not just destruction. It saw fear. It saw retreat. It saw the unraveling of Russia's naval power, live on the global stage. This was Sevastopol's night of fire. This was the moment when the Black Sea itself changed forever. The morning after the attack, Sevastopol was unrecognizable. The once proud naval base, always alive with the clatter of chains, the roar of engines, and the whistle of sailors marching, now lay in eerie silence. The docks smoldered. Twisted steel jutted out from the water like the bones of a fallen beast. The acrid stench of burned fuel and charred wood hung heavy in the air. Birds circled overhead, confused by the smoke. The city that had been a fortress now looked like a ruin. On the horizon, Russian ships were nothing more than dark silhouettes, steaming away, their wakes slicing across the Black Sea. They weren't advancing to fight. They were running. In Moscow, shockwaves rippled through the halls of power. The Kremlin had built its identity on strength, on the belief that Russia could not be broken. But the images of burning warships and a shattered fleet headquarters told a different story. Generals scrambled to craft explanations. Some claimed it was sabotage. Others insisted that the damage was minor. State media released carefully edited footage, showing ships still afloat, trying desperately to project calm. But no amount of propaganda could erase the truth. Satellite photographs didn't lie. Independent reports didn't lie. Families of sailors didn't lie. Russia had lost its most secure port. In the hospitals of Sevastopol, the human toll revealed itself. Young sailors lay on stretchers, their faces blackened with smoke, their uniforms burned. Nurses whispered prayers as they treated shrapnel wounds and broken bones. Some survivors spoke in shocked murmurs, their voices trembling. We didn't see it coming. The water lit up with fire. The sea drones, they came from nowhere, we couldn't stop them. Our ship is gone, just gone. In the silence between their words was the sound of defeat. Outside the hospitals, wives and mothers wept. Their tears mixed with the smell of gunpowder still drifting through the air. At sea, the retreating fleet pushed eastward. The waters were calm, but in the minds of every sailor, paranoia reigned. Every wave seemed to hide an enemy. Every flicker of light on the horizon might be another Ukrainian drone. Crews manned their guns without rest, scanning the sea, whispering superstitions. The fleet's flagship moved slowly, engines straining. Behind it, smaller corvettes followed like frightened children clinging to their mother. The ships were battered, scarred, and silent. When they finally reached Novorossiysk, the sailors looked upon the new harbor with little relief. Yes, they were safer here. But safety felt like exile. They knew they had left Sevastopol behind, not as conquerors, but as fugitives. For Ukraine, This was more than a tactical victory. It was a symbol. For 2 years, the war had brought endless destruction to Ukrainian cities, Kharkiv under bombardment, Mariupol reduced to rubble, Kyiv attacked with missiles. But now, at last, the war had flipped. Ukraine had struck not just at soldiers, but at the very pride of the Russian Empire. Crowds in Odessa cheered when they heard the news. Farmers in Mykolaiv raised their heads to the sky, smiling for the first time in weeks.